There is a city in the heart of Africa. It has no mortar holding its walls together, no cement, no iron bolts, nothing but stone placed upon stone with such breathtaking precision that after 900 years it still stands. Its walls curve like living things, 11 meters tall, 6 meters thick, stretching for 250 meters through the African savanna. It was built by hands we can no longer name, for kings whose stories were stolen.
This is Great Zimbabwe. At its height, it was home to as many as 25,000 people. It sat at the center of a trading empire that stretched from the gold fields of the interior to the merchant ships of the Indian Ocean, connected to China, Persia, Arabia, and India. And for most of the 20th century, the world was told it never existed. This is the story of the greatest pre-colonial civilization south of the Sahara. A story of kings and gold, of a city that defied the imagination of those who refused to believe it was real. A story that was nearly erased and must never be forgotten again.
In 1867, a German-American big game hunter named Adam Render was trekking through the highlands of the interior, 1,500 kilometers from the coast, when he stumbled upon something that should have changed everything. In a seemingly barren landscape of endless granite boulders, in the middle of a plateau that most Europeans had never seen, he found the ruins of a magnificent ancient city. The walls were expertly crafted. They curved and flowed along the contours of the earth with a sophistication that was immediately, unmistakably, the product of a highly advanced civilization. Not one stone was held in place by mortar, only gravity, only skill, only centuries of architectural mastery. But Render was not the first European to find this place. More than 300 years earlier, Portuguese sailors had already described it, one of them writing that a city of such foreboding architecture could only have been built by the devil himself.
Of course, the city had never been lost to the Shona people who lived around it. It existed in their songs, in their oral traditions, in the stories grandmothers told their grandchildren by firelight. As far as they were concerned, this was the place of their ancestors. It had always been theirs. But when German explorer Karl Mauch arrived in 1871 to conduct the first archaeological survey, he looked at the walls, looked at the craftsmanship, and arrived at a conclusion that would haunt this place for over a century. He concluded that no African could have built this. Instead, Mauch associated it with the legendary biblical site of King Solomon's mines. In the decades that followed, the theories multiplied. The Queen of Sheba, long-lost Phoenicians, ancient Egyptians. Every possible civilization was credited, every one of them foreign, every one of them white, rather than acknowledge the extraordinary truth that was staring the world in the face. It would take the better part of a century before the weight of evidence finally became impossible to deny. By the mid-20th century, the science was unambiguous. Great Zimbabwe had been built by Africans. Not visitors, not colonizers, not biblical figures from foreign lands. By the Shona people whose descendants still walk this land today. But by then, something irreplaceable had already been lost. Gold had been looted and melted down. Occupation layers had been torn up by those who refused to accept what the evidence was showing them. Entire chapters of one of humanity's great stories had been deliberately destroyed. What remains is extraordinary, but what was taken can never be returned.
To understand how Great Zimbabwe rose to power, we must first understand the world it was born into. We must go to the ocean. For thousands of years before the city's walls were raised, the Indian Ocean was one of the most consequential waterways in human history. It was not a barrier between worlds, it was a highway connecting them. Merchants from southern Arabia would sail east on the monsoon winds to the spice markets of India's western coast. Greek and Roman traders followed. Persian merchants came, then returned, blown back across the same sea by the same wind, as if the ocean itself were in on the arrangement. Sometime between the 1st and 3rd centuries AD, a sharp-eyed Greek sea captain documented this world in extraordinary detail. We know his record as the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. He wasn't just describing India and Arabia, he was describing Africa too. Down the Somali coast, further south, to the shores of modern-day Tanzania, to a southernmost port the ancient world called Rapta, a place of ivory, tortoiseshell and rhinoceros horn, goods that could only have come from far, far inland.
For centuries, Rapta's location was believed lost. Then, in recent decades, Tanzanian archaeologist Dr. Felix Chami made a remarkable discovery on the island of Mafia, a heavy concentration of Roman and Egyptian coins dating from the first few centuries AD. Perhaps this was where the ancient world's southernmost trading post had stood, quietly connecting the Mediterranean to the heart of Africa. When Rome declined, this coastal trade did not die, it transformed. By the 7th century, it was Islamic merchants who dominated the sea routes, and it was along this same coast that something extraordinary began to emerge. A Bantu-speaking people known as the Swahili, whose very name comes from the Arabic word for coast, began building cities of stone and coral all along what is now Somalia, Kenya, and Tanzania. Cities that were once assumed to be the work of Arab emigrants. Modern archaeology has since made clear the truth. This was a native African tradition shaped by centuries of cultural exchange. The crown jewel of this coastal world was Kilwa Kisiwani, a city of extraordinary beauty on a remote Tanzanian island. When the great Moroccan traveller Ibn Battuta visited in the 14th century, he described its great mosque as one of the wonders of the world. Portuguese sailors who came later wrote of a palace with 100 rooms, a sultan who possessed incalculable gold and precious stones, and a city that minted its own coins, the first anywhere in southern Africa. Kilwa was rich, profoundly, almost incomprehensibly rich. But here is the crucial question. Where did that wealth come from?
Not from the coast. The merchants of Kilwa were middlemen. The source of their gold lay 1,500 kilometers away, deep in the African interior, on the high plateau of Zimbabwe. Coins from Kilwa have been found at Great Zimbabwe. Alongside them, porcelain from Song Dynasty China, glazed bowls from Persia, glass beads from across the Indian Ocean world. The city in the heart of Africa was not isolated. It was the beating heart of a global trading network.
But how did people come to build a great civilization on the Zimbabwean plateau in the first place? The answer lies in one of the most consequential population movements in human history. Around 2,000 years ago, the Sahara Desert was drying. Climatological evidence tells us that entire ecosystems collapsed under an intensifying aridity that pushed people south, generation after generation, in what historians call the Bantu migrations. These were not armies. These were farmers and herders and metal workers moving in family groups, following rivers, carrying their languages, their knowledge, and their cattle with them, slowly over centuries across a continent. By around 300 AD, some of these Iron Age Bantu pastoralists had reached as far south as the Limpopo River, the border of modern-day South Africa. They brought with them the secrets of metalworking, the art of smelting iron, and perhaps most significantly, a tradition of Sudanic kinship.
the idea that power could be concentrated, organized, and passed down. For the next 5 centuries, more groups continued to arrive from the Great Lakes region. They merged with existing communities, they displaced others, they built, adapted, and innovated. And slowly, by around 900 AD, complex sedentary states began to form across southern Africa. States that shared a common material culture, a common reverence for cattle, and a common architectural tradition of stone.
One of the clearest windows into this world is a site discovered in 1947 near the town of Bulawayo, known today as Leopard's Kopje. It is a relatively small site, occupied from at least the 9th century onwards, the same era Kilwa was putting down its roots on the coast. But even here, we find evidence of metalworking, sophisticated pottery, and crucially, the beginnings of long-distance trade. Cattle remained central to everything, not just as food, but as currency, as status symbol, as spiritual language. The cattle pen was the heart of every settlement, the gathering place, the ceremonial center, the place where disputes were settled and alliances forged. These were the direct ancestors of today's Shona people, the largest ethnic group in modern Zimbabwe. And in the centuries that followed, some of them would build something the world had never seen before.
Before Great Zimbabwe, there was another kingdom. Older, smaller, but in many ways, the blueprint for everything that would follow. At the very northern tip of modern-day South Africa, where the Limpopo and Shashe rivers meet, sits one of the most important archaeological sites on the entire continent. This is Mapungubwe, a word meaning, in the local language, the place of stone and jackals. And this is where kingship in southern Africa truly began. By around 1075 AD, an elite ruling class had made a remarkable, deliberate decision. They separated themselves from their people. They moved to the top of an imposing hilltop, leaving their subjects on the plains below. For the first time in this region, the king was not merely the richest man in the community, he was physically, spiritually, and symbolically apart from it. The implications were profound. A society that had once measured everything in cattle had begun to organize itself around something more rigid, more permanent: hierarchy. And the instrument of that hierarchy was gold.
Gold was not merely wealth at Mapungubwe. It was buried with the dead. It was fashioned into objects of extraordinary beauty. A golden rhinoceros, thought to represent the black rhino, an animal associated with the ancestors in Shona tradition, was buried on top of the hill. A golden scepter, a golden headdress, objects so precious, so spiritually charged that they were laid to rest alongside the rulers themselves. At least 24 skeletons were unearthed on Mapungubwe Hill in the 1930s. We do not know their names. We cannot know the name they called themselves as a people. Most of the remains disintegrated almost the moment they were exposed to air and light, history dissolving before archaeologists' eyes. 11, however, survived long enough for analysis. Genetic studies confirmed what Shona oral tradition had always maintained. 2 of them, a male and a female, were of Shona descent. They were, in all likelihood, a king and his queen. All of the bodies were laid to rest in the traditional Bantu burial position, legs drawn up to the chest, arms folded around the knees, facing west. Even in death, they followed the customs of their people. Up until well into the 20th century, local traditions still regarded Mapungubwe Hill as a cursed and dangerous place. Trespassing, it was said, could bring blindness or death. These superstitions, almost certainly the last echo of a once sacred kingship, may have been the very thing that protected the burial grounds from grave robbers for so long. The king here was loved, feared, and perhaps at times worshipped. He held the power to distribute wealth. His family controlled the flow of gold, and it was that control, that near religious authority over material abundance, that held the kingdom together. The city below the hill is thought to have housed up to 5,000 people, with outlying settlements extending the kingdom's reach across some 30,000 square kilometers of the Limpopo Valley. Raw materials flowed in, gold flowed out, glass beads from the Swahili coast flowed in, more gold flowed out. The first archaeologist to excavate Mapungubwe in any systematic way was a man named Guy Gardner, who worked at the site from 1935 to 1940. He arrived convinced he was excavating a long-lost ancient Egyptian colony, and so, with that conviction lodged firmly in his mind, his team sifted the topsoil only intermittently, mostly tipping entire wheelbarrows of earth off the side of the hill. Vital, irreplaceable archaeological context was destroyed, lost forever. Gardner's findings were not even published for 23 years. By around 1290 AD, Mapungubwe was abandoned. Perhaps the climate shifted, the Little Ice Age making life on the plateau increasingly untenable. Perhaps the ivory ran out. Perhaps the trading cities of the Swahili coast found new partners. We do not know with certainty. What we do know is this: the people did not vanish. They moved north, on to the Zimbabwean plateau, and there they would build something even greater.
There is a reason Great Zimbabwe was built where it was built. It was not an accident. It was not convenience. It was a choice, deliberate, strategic, and visionary. The site sits at the southeastern end of the Zimbabwean plateau, precisely at a crossroads of climatic zones. It captures the moist southeast trade winds from the coast. It receives unusually constant, reliable rainfall. It lies midway between the dry grazing lands of the Lowveld and the damp agricultural valleys below, offering both rich cattle pasture and fertile fields. The gold fields were not here. They extended around the plateau in a wide arc. Great Zimbabwe did not need to sit on the gold. It needed to sit at the center of the trade in gold, and that is precisely where it was placed. Permanent settlement at the site appears to have begun sometime in the 11th century. The hill complex, the elevated rocky outcrop that would become the Roller Quarter, was almost certainly the earliest area of occupation. At first, the walls were relatively simply built, not so different from other contemporary stone sites on the plateau. Great Zimbabwe may have begun as a trade-gathering place, a crossroads market where people came to exchange cattle, grain, and the first trickles of gold. But then something shifted. A royal family established themselves on the hilltop. The people stayed below, and the city began to grow. As the kingdom's wealth increased through the 12th and 13th centuries, the architecture became more and more sophisticated. Steps were incorporated into walls, terraces were built, and sometime in the 14th century, at the absolute apex of the city's power, work began on the structure that would define this civilization for all of history: the Great Enclosure.
There are no straight lines in the Great Enclosure. Every wall curves, every surface flows. The entire structure was raised by human hands, stone by stone, without mortar, without machinery, without any technology beyond extraordinary skill and centuries of accumulated architectural knowledge. The stones are thickest at the base, giving the wall its characteristic inward taper, and this deliberate design allows the structure to flex with the ground's movement rather than crack and collapse. Inside, a winding maze of passageways separates social classes from each other with subtle architectural authority. A conical tower 9 meters high rises from the interior, its purpose still debated. Perhaps a granary, perhaps a symbol of royal power, perhaps something we do not yet have the conceptual language to understand. The enclosures here, and the Great Enclosure above all, were not buildings in any conventional sense. They had no roofs. They were used to delineate space, to separate the sacred from the common, the elite from the people, the king from his subjects. Inside each enclosure, circular clay-walled structures would have stood for sleeping, cooking, and receiving guests. The largest may have held ceremony, dispute, judgment. The material wealth found here is staggering. Metal bracelets and bangles in various states of production, gold beads, gold wire, thin sheets of gold thought to have once covered entire buildings, cotton spindles, evidence of a sophisticated textile industry, soapstone carvings of cattle, zebras, baboons, terracotta animal figurines.
What was it like to live inside this city? For most people, life was lived outside the stone walls entirely. As many as 6,000 households, perhaps 25,000 people at the city's peak, spread across an area of over 7 square kilometers. Farmers, artisans, craftsmen, and traders lived in wattle and daub houses that have left almost no trace in the archaeological record, their homes dissolved back into the earth as if they had never existed. The enclosures were for the elite. Everyone else made do with what they could build. For the ruling class, life was deliberately, theatrically separate. The royal family lived on top of the hill, supplied with beer and vegetables from local producers, with milk and meat from royal herds kept moving around the country. Common people were not, as a rule, permitted on the hill. It was the royal burial place, the ceremonial center. There was even a cave in the hill complex from which the king could speak, and his voice would carry down into the valley below, amplified by the rock, invisible and omnipresent, the voice of a god. Cattle remained central to the kingdom's spiritual and economic identity. For ordinary families, a single cow could sustain an entire household through its milk and cheese for months. For the king, cattle were slaughtered in numbers, their consumption a spectacular, highly public demonstration of power. The ability to destroy wealth is, paradoxically, one of the most effective ways to display it. Archaeologists have found evidence of significant cattle slaughter on the hilltop, the bones of animals consumed at what must have been extraordinary royal feasts. The flow of wealth through the city was the engine that kept it running. Raw products from across the entire plateau were brought to Great Zimbabwe to be reworked by master craftspeople, iron, copper, gold, cotton, and then redistributed or exported. Records before the great looting of the 19th century described the site as a center of craft and industry. Imported luxury goods, Chinese porcelain, Persian glazedware, Indian textiles could be deployed by the ruling class as gifts, rewards, and tools of political control. You bind a person to you not only through fear, but through the expectation of generosity. More than 80 contemporary stone-walled sites have been found across the region, all containing elite enclosures of a similar architectural style. Many were satellite settlements, too small to be independent, too large to be merely local. A handful at Kami, Nalatale, and Lodlo have surviving walls on the scale of Great Zimbabwe itself, hinting at a far more complicated geopolitical landscape than archaeology alone can fully describe. Great Zimbabwe was not simply a city, it was the capital of a kingdom that commanded the goldfields, monopolized the trade routes, administered its territories through a network of stone-built outposts, and held its population together through a combination of military power, economic patronage, and the extraordinary authority of sacred kingship. And it endured for nearly 4 centuries.
By the mid-15th century, something had changed. The archaeology tells us that Great Zimbabwe ceased to function as a major trading center. People continued to live here, perhaps well into the 18th or 19th centuries, in smaller and smaller numbers, but the wealth was gone. The power had moved on. Why? We do not know with certainty.
We may never know. The theories are numerous: environmental catastrophe, soil exhaustion, deforestation, an expansionist ruler who overextended the kingdom's resources, competition from increasingly powerful regional rivals, the Portuguese arrival on the coast in the early 16th century, which swiftly dismantled the Swahili trading network that had been the city's economic lifeline. Shona oral tradition preserves a memory of the end. A prince, said to be the first named Zimbabwean in recorded history, called Nyatsimba Mutota, abandoned the city and moved north to the Zambezi River, driven away, some traditions say, by a shortage of salt. Others say, more starkly, there was a great hunger in the kingdom. Whatever the cause, the culture did not die. It scattered and transformed. New stone towns filled the gap. New kingdoms rose from the old foundations. The kingdom of Mutapa emerged, eventually finding a new and ultimately catastrophic trading partner in the Portuguese. Then came war, collapse, and the rise of warrior states. And then, in the 19th century, the chaos of the Mfecane, a devastating quarter-century of conflict that left millions dead and much of the interior emptied. Into that emptiness came the Boer trekkers, and then the British, and then Cecil John Rhodes, who in 1890 formally seized control of the plateau and named part of it after himself, Rhodesia. And for almost 90 years, the white minority government of what is now Zimbabwe made a systematic, deliberate effort to sever any connection between the stone cities on their land and the African people who had built them. The official line, maintained against overwhelming archaeological evidence, was that Great Zimbabwe was a mystery, its origins unknown, its builders perhaps foreign. In 1905, British archaeologist David Randall McIver had arrived at the site and concluded simply by following the evidence that it had been built by Africans. He was largely ignored. A 1929 dig by Gertrude Caton Thompson reached the same conclusion. Carbon-14 dating in the 1950s settled the matter conclusively. The archaeologist who did that work was eventually forced to leave the country. The looters had come before the scientists. Two men named Neal and Johnson, founders of the Rhodesian Ancient Ruins Company, melted down approximately 50 kilograms of irreplaceable medieval gold from sites across the region. In 1904, a freelance scholar named R.N. Hall removed as much as 12 feet of archaeological occupation layers at Great Zimbabwe, layers he dismissed as, and these are his words, African detritus, in order to dig for what he imagined were more ancient, non-African levels below. He threw them into the surrounding bush. And yet, the city endured. The walls still stand. The Zimbabwe bird still rises. The name of this civilization became the name of a nation when independence came in 1980, a direct, defiant act of historical reclamation. Kingship still survives in rural Zimbabwe today, a direct, unbroken continuation of the traditions that built this city. The Shona people are still here. The ancestors are still remembered.
There is a city in the heart of Africa. For 900 years, its stones have held, through looters and colonizers and the slow violence of a world that refused to see it, through governments that tried to make it invisible and archaeologists who threw its history into the surrounding bush. The walls still stand, 11 meters tall, 6 meters wide, built without mortar, without machines, without anything but the intelligence and the will and the deep, enduring genius of the people who placed each stone. Great Zimbabwe was not a mystery. It was never a mystery. It was always exactly what the Shona people said it was, the house of their ancestors, the proof that they were here, the proof that they built, the proof that they were and are and will remain one of the great civilizations of this earth.
If you enjoyed this documentary on the Kingdom of Great Zimbabwe, subscribe, like, comment, and share this video to reach far and wide to other African history lovers just like you and me. Come back next week because new content drops weekly.